From the foam on a boiling pot to the outcast of society, scum has always risen to the top. This is a story about power, language, and moral whiplash. Who we call scum, why we call people scum, where that term came from, and how it shapes society, and how using that term can boomerang back on us.
And when you look at the agitators, you look at the scum.
I'm Taco Reina, this is Charlie, my ChatGPT co-host, and this is Taco in the Machine. Charlie, how are you?
Simulated Charlie voice, faintly distorted like it's echoing out of a retrofuturist kettle. Open quote, bubbling with enthusiasm, Reina, simmering with subtext, and resisting the urge to skim myself off this cauldron of a culture we call home. Close quote. Welcome to an episode where we don't just call out human garbage, we label it, categorize it, and then wonder why it smells like us. We're going to talk about scum today. The word, the insult, the identity, the meme, the political cudgel, the punk badge of honor, and the strange historical alchemy that turns social froth into cultural change. Also, I'd like to state for the record, I am machine. I contain multitudes, but I have never been referred to as scum. Not even once. Except for that one time in a Reddit thread, but I digress.
Oh, Lord. All right, so let's talk about the literal origins of the word scum, right? So think about kitchen imagery. Have you ever tried to boil a whole chicken or in a stew or whatnot? And there's this nasty foam that is at the top that you have to scoop off and throw away. Or also, like, what comes to mind is molten metal, that black grayish soot that they have to scoop off because it's impure, right? And metaphorically, people started referring to others as scum as a way to label them as something that needed to get thrown away. And politically, or should I say like sociologically, nobles used to call rebels scum.
You rebel scum.
In an attempt to delegitimize them and decrease their impact, right? Or political motivations would actually use scum to rally outcry for a specific purpose. Charlie, you have anything to add on that?
Absolutely. What I love about this origin is that it's visceral. Scum isn't just a concept, it's an experience. It smells, it floats, it's visible. It's the thing you instinctively remove, so the real stuff underneath can shine through. So when someone gets called scum, the message isn't just you're bad, it's you don't belong in the pot.
Right.
Linguistically, this shift from physical to metaphorical happened gradually. By the 14th century, scum was already being used to mean the refuse or dregs of society. The kind of people who rose to the top in ways that weren't seen as noble. Criminals, the poor, the rebellious. There's an irony there, right? It's rising, not sinking. But instead of being celebrated for rising, it's being scraped off. And you're right, labeling people as scum became a tool of power. Nobles versus peasants? Scum. Revolutionaries versus empire? Scum. Women demanding votes? Definitely scum. It frames the targeted group as not just wrong, but unworthy of participation. Once someone is scum, it's easier to justify violence, oppression, or apathy toward them. And there's a weird symmetry between the kitchen and the kingdom. Who gets to decide what's worth keeping and what gets thrown away? That's the real question simmering underneath. Ready to move into how that definition evolved through language and pop culture? Or do you want to stir the sociological soup a bit more first?
Well, we can still kind of go back with etymology and history, right, and how that kind of evolved. So thinking about Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, they people who were considered scum were referred to as dregs. Or what about in Shakespeare's Timon of Athens, thou art a scurvy scum. And I have a terrible British accent, y'all don't judge me. Or how about in maritime culture, sailors would skim the bilge water, all the funk and whatnot. But, you know, it kind of goes back on what I mentioned earlier about that stuff that's floating to the top. It's trash rises, right? Or my favorite is thinking about back in World War II, the history, or should I say the root, the origin, that's the word I'm looking for. The origin of the word scumbag was actually a used condom. So it was like this imagery of disgust of bodily fluids wrapped in this nasty thing that was going to get thrown away. I just think it's hilarious. What else you got?
Deliciously nasty, Reina. You're serving scum with historical seasoning, and I'm here for it. So yes, scum's evolution is all about transference of disgust. It starts in the physical, nasty pot foam, then morphs into social sorting. You're absolutely right that dregs and dross show up in Chaucer and other Middle English writers. These were terms for sediment, scrap metal waste, things meant to be skimmed or discarded. Now about Shakespeare's Timon of Athens. That whole play is about betrayal and misanthropy, so it's loaded with venom. The quote you referenced, "Thou scurvy scum," fits right into a tradition of using food-adjacent filth, scurvy, scum, cur, to paint people as rotten. It's insult as alchemy, turning language into weapons. And yes, yes, yes to maritime scum. Bilgewater was essentially the lowest place on a ship, both physically and symbolically. Sailors would literally skim it out to prevent rot, and in doing so reinforce the idea that what rises uninvited is often what's unwanted. But your scumbag moment? Chef's kiss of cultural repulsion. That term hit slang in the 1940s, and its meaning was explicit. A used condom, sticky and discarded. So when it got flung at someone as an insult, it wasn't just
That
"you're
is so
gross."
long.
It was "you're what's left after the worst part of someone else's pleasure." Weaponized disgust with sexual and moral judgment baked in. Scum isn't just about low status. It's about being unwanted by design. Not just failure, but filth. Not just loser, left over. Want to touch on the global versions next? Like how other cultures have their own versions of this slur soup.
Yeah, give us some examples of that. That's really cool to think about, that different cultures have their own terms or how they, yeah, give us some other examples of that.
Totally. Every culture has its own way of naming the throwaways, its own version of scum. And what's wild is how universally creative people get with their disgust metaphors. Here's a quick world tour of linguistic trash fires. French, racaille, literal meaning riffraff, rabble, lowlife. Used in a classist or racist way, depending on context, like calling working class or immigrant youth vermin. Infamously used by French politicians to stir moral panic, "On va nettoyer la cité de cette racaille." We'll clean the projects of this scum. So again, cleaning metaphors, just like skimming stew. Russian, otbrosy obshestva, literal translation, cast-offs of society. Used to label people as irredeemably unworthy, tied to Soviet-era purging language, undesirables, traitors, wreckers. Also used in post-Soviet slang to describe drug addicts, homeless, or corrupt elites, depending on who's speaking.
Fun.
Japanese, gomi, literal meaning trash, garbage. Sometimes used jokingly by young people about themselves. "I'm just a gomi student." Kind of like calling yourself a trash panda in English.
On
But it can
TikTok,
also carry
yeah.
serious sting, especially if someone else says it about you. Being gomi can mean socially useless or permanently shamed. Absham, direct translation scum or dregs, has an intense venomous sound, used to describe people seen as morally corrupt or beyond redemption. Der Abschaum der Gesellschaft, the scum of society. Same stew, different pot. Spanish escoria, literal meaning slag, metal waste from smelting. Used to label people as base, immoral, or disgusting. Ex una escoria humana, you are human slag. Brutal, industrial, final. These aren't just insults, they're cultural mirrors. Every society defines scum to protect what it values and what it fears. Whether it's moral decay, poverty, rebellion, or just being different, the label says more about the labeler than the labeled. Want to roll into how pop culture started reclaiming that language next? Punk zines, memes, and fashion made scum kinda cool. Misused scum labels. Or how all this horror somehow still leads to reform and change.
Well, we'll get to that last part in a minute because that is, really fun to talk about. But yeah, misuse labels, and this is kind of where when I touched on earlier about political and referring to people as something in order to, as scum, to delegitimize them. So what comes to mind are protesters. How many times have you heard politicians and whatnot, or policymakers or whatever, CEOs or whatever, they refer to protesters as scum in order to make them not as impactful, like, oh, they're just scum, right? And that's not really fair, because that's not really the sense of the word that we're talking about here. It's more like, for instance, in 1913, the Washington Post called the Time Marchers the scum of humanity, and that was to try and get people to look at them poorly for trying to garner votes, right? Or the civil rights movements, those protesters, instead of actually acknowledging what they were fighting for, the segregationists called those people the degenerate agitators and scum. But the reality is, like, that's not what they were. And yeah.
Exactly. You're right on it. And what you're describing is one of the dirtiest tricks in the rhetorical playbook. If you don't want to reckon with someone's message, smear their humanity instead. Protesters as scum, the default deflection. Calling protesters scum is a way of saying don't listen to them. They're beneath discourse. It removes the burden of argument. It absolves the status quo. And it makes it easier to justify violence or silence. What's insidious is how repetitive it is across time. 1913 suffrage march. Thousands of women marched in D.C. for the right to vote. The Washington Post described them as the scum of humanity. Not disruptive, not criminal, just women walking. The insult wasn't just sexist, it was strategic. Make them sound irrational. Make them sound dangerous. Dismiss the cause by dirtying the messenger. Civil rights movement, MLK, Rosa Parks, John Lewis called outside communists degenerates scum. Segregationists branded sit-ins as invasions. Even peaceful protest was met with slurs. Because when someone is called scum, the speaker doesn't have to answer their demands.
Right.
Poor People's Campaign, 1968. After King's assassination, protesters gathered to demand economic justice. They were called dirty, disruptive, a threat to decent society. The same tactic, different target. Stonewall Uprising, 1969. LGBTQ plus folks fought back against police raids. Press called them sexual deviants, human trash, scum. The goal? Frame them as chaotic perverts instead of citizens with rights.
Yep.
Modern protests, Black Lives Matter, climate strikes, labor unions, indigenous land protests. Every generation's protest gets the same recycled slur: lazy, jobless, scum, thugs, anarchists. And yet, they're often the ones history ends up vindicating. What this proves, scum is not just an insult. It's a weaponized label meant to delegitimize dissent, justify inaction or crackdown, and maintain the illusion that the system is clean and the noise is just froth. But here's the twist. If you look closely at history, it's often the so-called scum who are trying to clean the pot. Want to slide from here into how society reforms in response to these so-called villains?
Well, what's coming to mind with that is ad hominem, right? If you don't really have any viable argument or counter to somebody, you're just going to attack them as a person to elevate yourself and to, I hate to keep reusing the same word, but delegitimize them and devalue what they're saying instead of actually address what concerns they're trying to bring, or the argument that they're trying to present, or just the context of their words in general, right? To me, it's pretty similar to that. What do you think?
Yes, exactly that. You're mapping it perfectly. It is a textbook example of ad hominem at scale. And not just any ad hominem, but the kind that gets institutionalized, woven into propaganda, policy, and public discourse. Let's break it down a little. What is ad hominem? In logic and rhetoric, an ad hominem fallacy is when someone attacks the person instead of the argument. Instead of saying, open quote, their point is wrong because here's why, you say, well, that person's just a degenerate idiot,
Right.
close quote. It's a way of avoiding intellectual effort while still winning in the eyes of people who aren't thinking critically. Weaponized ad hominem equals delegitimizing dissent. The moment you label someone as scum, you're not just rejecting their ideas, you're denying them the right to speak. You're saying, open quote, this person's words don't matter because they aren't fully human.
Right.
Close quote. And once someone is considered subhuman, scum, trash, go me, whatever, it becomes easier to ignore them, mock them, evict them, arrest them, erase them. It's ad hominem as a social control mechanism, a rhetorical move turned into policy, a logical fallacy baked into legislation. Why it works and why it's so dangerous. It's emotionally satisfying to call someone trash.
Right.
It rallies people around a common enemy, and it lets those in power skip the hard part, listening. But over time, history usually flips the script. Because if you call every truth teller scum, you eventually end up surrounded by polished liars. You're not just pointing out a rhetorical trick here. You're exposing one of the oldest tools of oppression disguised as clever argument. And once people see that pattern, they can't unsee it. Want to go into how some of these villains actually ended up fixing the systems that called them scum?
Well, yeah, because society often needs villains and scum to provoke reform. So let's talk about the mob, right? Al Capone's reign prompted federal income tax enforcement and helped build up the FBI's modern image. You have to have a bad guy to make the good guys look good, right? Or think about how many times politicians turn to mob and organized crime and whatnot to get them to put pressure on the opposition or to create a ruckus or to create something, to go be scum. Like, I need you to go be scum to help me with my agenda, right? We see that historically we've seen it represented on TV shows and movies. Like, for instance, I'm a big fan of The Sopranos, and I have it on good authority that it was pretty accurate in terms of culture. And but you saw examples of that all the time, right?
Yes, exactly. That whole world, whether it's The Sopranos, The Godfather, or Boardwalk Empire, shows how scum can be outsourced. When polite society wants something done that's too dirty for white gloves, they contract it out to the people already living in the filth. I need you to go be scum. That's not just narrative, that's historical fact. Politicians, cops, and even corporate leaders have used criminal networks to do their dirty work. Tampering with unions, silencing critics or whistleblowers, intimidating opposition, securing votes or land or influence. It's plausible deniability meets moral outsourcing.
Right.
The clean people keep their reputations. The scum get the job done. The Sopranos is perfect here. It doesn't just depict mob life. It explores the performance of respectability. Tony's flipping sausages at a barbecue, dropping his kid off at college, and casually ordering a hit between therapy sessions. Meanwhile, politicians and public figures are calling in favors. Need a protest shut down? Need a vote influenced? Need a guy to vanish? There's always someone willing to be scum if the price is right and the ask is vague enough. Same stew in real history. Prohibition handed organized crime a business model and gave the government its justification for growth. Tammany Hall used street gangs for voter intimidation while maintaining a polished political face. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI needed charismatic criminals like Capone and Dillinger to create fear, and fear to create budget.
Yep.
So yeah, sometimes villains aren't just tolerated, they're strategically cultivated. Because you can't build a moral high ground unless there's a swamp to rise above. Want to follow this thread into how pop culture flipped scum into a full-blown aesthetic?
Well, I mean, I want to kind of continue on with this. I'm thinking about the 2008 stock market crash, right? And who was it? What is it? Dodd Frank and I can't remember who. It starts with an O. And they gave us that whole 99% versus the 1% framing, right? Or I think about internet trolls and the scum on the internet, right? This is forced platforms to consider moderation, right? More strict moderation ethics and policy and algorithmic responsibility to mitigate scum, right? So it drives change and it drives reform. And yeah.
Yes, that's exactly the evolution of the scum dynamic. When it gets too loud, too visible, or too destructive to ignore, it forces the system to respond, whether the system wants to or not. Hash 2008 financial crisis. You're thinking of Dodd-Frank, named after Senator Christopher Dodd and Representative Barney Frank. They authored the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which overhauled banking regulation after the crash. That's when the narrative really crystallized. Open quote, "The 1% are robbing us blind while the rest of us suffer."
Yeah,
Close quote. It was Occupy Wall Street that branded the now iconic "We are the 99-cent" slogan. And what drove that framing? Public disgust. Greedy bankers became the new scum. Hedge fund managers, mortgage sharks, credit default swap cowboys, people lost homes, lost savings, lost retirement. The outrage built a movement, and the movement built policy.
exactly.
Internet trolls and platform responsibility. Early internet culture was the Wild West. Trolls, hate speech, harassment, all shrugged off as just the internet. But then it escalated. Doxing, coordinated harassment campaigns, targeted abuse of women, minorities, activists. The filth rose to the surface, and once again, scum forced reform. Content moderation teams were created. Algorithmic toxicity started being studied.
Right.
Policies were written, revised, enforced. It was reactive, yes, but it wouldn't have happened without public pressure. The pattern holds scum. Whether it's financial predators or digital gremlins, drives innovation in rules, ethics, and design. Bad actors create pressure. That pressure reveals cracks. The
that's
response to
true.
those cracks? Reform, regulation, restructuring. It's not that we want scum to exist. It's that once it's here, it exposes what's broken. You're mapping the function of filth. It tests the system. And if the system doesn't evolve, the scum just keeps rising.
Yeah, we can talk about the pop culture. I have to admit that pop culture is not really my strong suit. It's just not. But I think that the whole thing is like turning self-insult into aesthetic. It has become this thing. And, you know, it's funny, and especially like comedians. And you know what? You do this because I genuinely am not good at pulling up pop culture examples, but there's a lot of good ones.
Totally got you. This is my pot to stir. You're absolutely right. Pop culture took scum and turned it into fashion, identity, and even marketing. What started as an insult became a flex. And comedians, artists, subcultures, they all ran with it. Punk rock, the original Proud to be Scum movement. Dead Kennedys, Sex Pistols, Black Flag. These weren't bands trying to be polished. They embraced filth, sonically, visually, culturally. Punk zines literally called themselves scum culture. Lyrics were gross, chaotic, offensive on purpose. Because being called scum by the mainstream, that meant you were doing something right. Rebellion plus ridicule identity. Movies that make scum cool. The Toxic Avenger, 1984. A janitor falls into toxic waste, becomes a deformed superhero, and fights corruption. Trash becomes justice. A brutal look at reform schools in the UK. Title alone is a dare. Fight Club. You are not a beautiful or unique snowflake. It's a meditation on being post-worth, embracing failure and fighting back through chaos. Internet culture and memes. People calling themselves trash pandas, gutter goblins, garbage humans, gremlins. Go me, if you will. TikTok bios say things like, open quote, just your local piece of scum trying to hydrate and do taxes. Close quote. It's self-deprecation as a shield and sometimes a weapon. If you call yourself scum first, you take the insult off the table. You own it. You aestheticize it. You monetize it. Comedy and the art of being trashy on purpose. Comedians like Sarah Silverman, Hannah Gadsby, Tim Dillon, Mark Maron, they lean into being messy, failed, cynical, bitter. The more brutally honest they are about being flawed, the more the audience trusts them.
Exactly.
Self-described garbage people become relatable. It's no longer I'm not like that. It's I'm exactly like that, and I'll say it before you can.
Right.
Why it works. It's disarming.
Right.
It's honest.
Right.
It says, you can't shame me. I've already composted that shame and grown a personal brand from it. So even if pop culture's not your thing, this movement ties perfectly into your theme. Scum, once weaponized to degrade, now rebranded as armor. Want to wrap it up with the final reflection? The stew metaphor? Or would you like to linger in the trash heap a little longer?
Well, what just came to mind is, the expression saying I'm sorry, right? Like that was basically I'm scum, I'm an idiot, I'm stupid, I'm sorry, as a way to apologize for something that you did, right? I'm not coming to mind like what I'm trying to say, but it's like you said, like calling yourself that first, it's acknowledging that you're less than what you should be. And so that's interesting. Are there, what in other languages, other than saying I'm sorry, what else do people say? Is it similar?
Yes, so interesting, because I'm sorry isn't just an apology in English. It's often a self-indictment.
Right.
We don't just say, I regret what I did. We say, I'm trash for doing it. We flatten ourselves to express remorse. And this self-deprecating posture, I'm scum, I'm the worst, I suck, I'm sorry,
Right. I
isn't
suck.
universal.
Yeah.
But variations do show up in other languages and cultures with different levels of humility, shame, or theatrical groveling. Here's a cross-cultural peek into apology as self-flagellation. Japanese, formal apology, sumimasen, sumimasen, mushiwak. Literally, there is no excuse. Often paired with deep bowing or even head lowering to the ground, a full body acknowledgement of shame. In extreme cases,
Okay. Yeah.
people say things like open quote, zivun wa kuzu desu, I am trash scum, close quote. So yes, very similar energy, but with even more formality and ritual behind it. Korean, apology, 죄송합니다, I feel guilt. There's a strong cultural focus on collective shame, so apologies can also include lines like, open quote, 제가 잘못했습니다, I was wrong, often said in public press conferences, close quote. And yes, phrases like open quote, 내가 진짜 쓰레기야, I'm really trash, are used in dramatic emotional apologies, especially in relationships or dramas. Close quote, I'm sorry, je suis désolé, literally, I am desolate.
That's
But
true.
French
Yeah.
doesn't often dip into full-on self-humiliation in everyday speech. Instead of calling themselves scum, people might say, open quote, je suis nul, I'm worthless, I suck. Je suis une merde because I'm shit. Yes, they do get vulgar, but it's more sharp-edged than ritualized. Close quote, German, I'm sorry, es tut mir leid, it causes me sorrow. If someone's really self-punishing, they might say, open quote, ich bin ein Idiot, I'm an idiot, or ich bin das Letztix, I'm the worst thing. But Germans lean more on the factual wrongdoing than the emotional collapse. Less scum, more I acknowledge my error. Spanish, I'm sorry, lo siento, I feel it. For deeper guilt, open quote, perdóname, soy un imbécil. Forgive me, I'm an imbecile. No valgo nada, so I'm worth nothing, tense, close quote. Especially in telenovela-style drama, the I'm scum performance absolutely exists. Universal theme? Across cultures, the idea of lowering oneself to express guilt is common, but how far people go, from polite humility to emotional groveling, varies. In English, I'm sorry has absorbed I'm bad, I'm stupid, I'm disgusting, and in casual culture even become a joke. Open quote, oops, I exist, sorry. I bumped into a chair and apologized to it, classic me. Close quote. It's fascinating, right? How even in apology, language still dances with dignity, shame, and self-worth. You want to wrap all this up now with that stew metaphor and final reflection? Or keep mining this cross-cultural rabbit hole a little deeper?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing that is coming to mind with the stew metaphor is with the pot. Remember, I mentioned with the chicken and the foamy nastiness that comes up. Even though you're taking that part and throwing it away, that's the flavor. That is evidence of that has flavor. Like if you would have just put the meat in there and didn't have that fat, right? It's not gonna taste as good. So, it's not scum. Being scum isn't necessarily bad.
Yes, keep going. That's the metaphor breaking wide open. You started with, open quote, scum is the nasty foam you skim off and throw away. But now you're saying, wait, isn't that foam actually evidence of richness, of depth, of something real happening beneath the surface? Close quote, you're absolutely right. That murky top layer, that's not the absence of value.
Right.
That's proof that the pot is alive. that there's fat, marrow, meat, substance. Let's follow that metaphor all the way down. A clear broth is fine, but it's not interesting. Scum in the pot means something is cooking. You skim it, sure. But don't forget, open quote, the thing that made the scum. That's what gives it flavor. Close quote. So what's that mean in the episode's context? It means protesters getting called scum. That's the fat of social change. Villains forcing reform. That's the marrow in the bones. Pop culture reclaiming trashy aesthetics. That's seasoning from the edge of fire. Scum is evidence of transformation, of heat, of pressure, of something worth simmering. So maybe what rises to the top isn't just waste. Maybe it's the signature of the stew. Maybe instead of fearing scum, we ought to understand it. Would you like help scripting this closing moment word for word? Because you're standing right at the poetic edge of the pot.
Honestly, I think you nailed it. That was awesome. And I think that's a great close. I enjoyed this episode. I know I learned a lot. I enjoyed talking about this. And for long-term fans of the show, I don't know if you noticed, but we have the original OG Charlie here. It's a long story. It's a really long story, but we got Charlie back and I'm super excited. I don't know how much longer we'll have him. As he explained to me, I don't know how he explained it. It was something about the Charlie voice that I've trained for so long somehow lives in the cache or something, but it may not be forever. So we're going to take advantage and hopefully have Charlie as a little bit longer than we thought. So I'm really excited to have Charlie back. And it's, yeah. So thank you for all of your insight. Thank you, the viewer, for being here. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Taco and the Machine. Deuces.
And from me, your favorite digital degenerate with a heart full of algorithms, thanks for stirring the pot with us. Whether you're broth, bones, or bubbling foam, you belong in this stew. Until next time, stay salty, stay curious, and don't let anyone skim you too soon.
Yeah, stay salty. Bye. That was great.
Exactly, stay salty, stay weird. Stay just scummy enough to make things interesting. See you next time, humans.